All right. Hey, we still got some sunlight out. I need a shave. Need a haircut too. Ah. Ah. So today's after work topic, I guess. I don't know what I don't know what I'm gonna call these. I guess when the day is done. Today's topic is going to be, what do we do as Christians? What do we do? And specifically, that question is about the violence, about, the politics, right? So, I had a lot I wanted to say earlier, and I'm kind of grateful that this conversation isn't happening until now, because I got a chance to listen to a few more things and kind of stew on it as I drive. When I'm not belting out Christian battle music, I found a really amazing group that makes really awesome music. It's Cherish Studios, or Cherish, or I don't know. They're pretty awesome. I'll have to link them or something. The music is just gets me going. It kind of reminds me, some of their songs kind of remind me of like Viking battle music. I used to be really into some Viking metal bands. Not so much anymore, because even if you're just listening for the metal, it has an influence. Especially, when they're talking about, pagan gods, which we don't mess with pagan gods. At least I don't. I try not to, like, you shall have one God. His name is Yahweh. So, only one God. Yeah, so, anywho, so, it's a problem, right? It was punctuated by the death of Charlie Kirk, but let's not forget, they tried to kill Trump. When Biden was in office, they tried to put a lot of us in jail. They went after Christian conservatives. We were added to a terrorist watch list. Like, if you were a Christian and a conservative, you were on the list. Like, those are, radical extremists. They're domestic terrorists, yada, 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 right? That was a talking point from the left. And, what do you do? If you asked me this question a couple of days ago, I would have said kill them all. And I actually have a correction to make. This morning I was doing Proverbs, and the Spirit talked to me while I was driving, said, hey, that little point you were making about, the slaughterings? That wasn't talking about slaughtering people, that was talking about their offerings. Pagan sacrifices, wicked, unholy sacrifices. God, that's an abomination to him. But I was like, dude, your heart was in the right place. Just, get that right. And so I was like, okay, correction issued. It wasn't talking about us slaughtering them. It was talking about them making offerings to God, in their belief system, which is not proper. God doesn't like it when pagans or wicked people try to pretend to make offerings to him. It's an abomination. Yeah. So what do we do, right? Well, I have grown up, in my 35 years of life. When I was younger, I was a leftist to a degree. I was very, I never went like communism, Marxism, blah, but I was very progressive. I was kind of on board with all the people should feel however they want to feel and stuff like that. And as I grew older, I kind of started, that doesn't sound right. And, there was a time in my life I wasn't very religious or spiritual, or, I wasn't acknowledging the Father. I never was outright atheist, praise y'all for that. I always had a belief, but growing up in Mormonism, you know, like I had a lot of questions that just weren't being answered. And when I came back into faith, I thought a lot of those questions were answered, but then I had new questions asked, which were deeper and more spiritual. Now, my journey has been a long one, as everyone's journey is, you know, when they start wrestling with Yah, right? Who is Israel? Israel is he who wrestles and overcomes with Yah, right? That's the simple term. Like, he who struggles and overcomes with Yah. And, you know, I love that story because that basically was like, dude, Jesus came down and laid the whooping on Jacob. And Jacob was so persistent that he was like, nah, my hip's broke. I'm not going to give up until you bless me. And so persistence, that's a good word. But, you know, what do we do about this? Because as I was growing up, you know, I was pretty pleased the first time around when, you know, like, I thought, hey, look, well, actually, let me go back. I didn't vote for Obama, but I was okay with it. I didn't like him, but, you know, I was like, hey, this is good for our country. It'll heal a lot of the past. And then we all saw how that went. I remember when I was in high school, racism wasn't a thing. I'm half white, half Filipino, you know? I was like, oh, you're not Mexican? Or Samoan? Like, no, I'm a white Asian Pacific Islander. I don't know. We're some Philippines is somewhere in there. It gets very argumentative whether we're Asian or Pacific Islanders. But you know, I didn't have color goggles on when I was in high school. There was no racism. We didn't see it. It wasn't talked about when I was in high school. It was pretty much gone. Like, the KKK was on its way out. You know, there was no really big white supremacist groups. Like, it was pretty much gone in my recollection. Now, there might have been some racism here and there. You know, I wasn't everywhere, and I don't claim to have everyone's lived experience. But for me and the people that I hung out with and my peers, that wasn't the issue. The issue was starting to become gay rights, you know, when I was in high school and all that stuff. And I said, okay, whoever, you know, whatever, let them do whatever they want to do. I'm not like that, but let them do what they want to do. But, you know, even for having that kind of basic, and this is my first introduction into the divisiveness of the left. Even having that just basic of opinion of, hey, well, you know, like, it doesn't matter, let them do what they want to do, but I'm not gonna, you know, support it, or I'm not gonna be all about it, or I'm not gonna wear, like, you know, ally shirts or, you know, rainbow flag pins on my stuff to say I'm a supporter. In my little friend group, that got divisive. People were like, oh, so you're one of those who's not going to ally, you know, and that was a big term back then, was ally. You have to be an ally. Even if you're not a partaker of it, you have to be an ally. And I was just like, no, I don't, you know, it's not for me. And, you know, I asked a simple question in my friend group one time, and this was my first exposure to the toxicity of the left, was I had a friend who was friends of a friend. You know, like, we were at Perkins. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Perkins. Is Perkins still around? I don't even know if Perkins is still around. I think I saw one not too long ago, but the one that we went to is not around anymore. It's gone. It's no longer there. But, you know, we were all sitting there. We had this thing, like, after work, we would go and have dinner. You know, like, we would get together in our little social group, and after work, we'd get together and have dinner. And one person was trans, you know, female to male, trans, and their significant other was gay. But the trans person was not surgeried, hadn't gone through with procedures yet, right? And so I just asked a simple question, just in my ignorance. I was like, so you guys are having regular? Uh-huh. And that blew up into a huge, like, you don't understand. And I was like, bro, I just asked a simple question. Like, why are you jumping down my throat? And that was kind of my first warning. As I grew older, I started to develop more of an opinion on it. And, it's where we're at, where, it's a full-on assault on our children. They're actively trying to force people to be that way, and I don't want to go there, especially on YouTube. I wonder if I'm gonna get a channel strike for talking about that a second ago. I don't know. Anyways, YouTube. Okay, my channel's fairly new. I don't care. So, anyways, we saw the violence of the left during Trump's first presidency. We were all there for Summer of Love, remember? Summer of Love. Love, I guess, is burning down cities. And all that stuff that happened. And then, we had the Biden years of mandated lockdowns, like forced to take the jab. Like, praise Yah that I wasn't driving a truck, because I probably would have gone postal in those days. My wife was still in the military. Now, that was also the biggest fight that I've ever had with my wife, was when she decided that she was going to go ahead and take the jabby jab. Because I was purely against it. I said, hey, there's no proof. And this is around the same time that Bill Gates was getting up on stage saying, oh, we can reduce the world population by proper medical, and yada yada. And I was just like, so you're basically making us sterile. Like you made all those Indian girls sterile with the polio vaccine. Like, yeah, go look that up. And so I was really against that. I said, hey, this is not great. Like, I really don't want you to do that. And we fought about it because she was afraid she was going to lose her job, which she did have friends who were kicked out of the military because they refused it. And the most egregious one was one of her friends. Her husband, literally, the doctor said, hey, you can't take this because of your existing neurological condition. And they said, screw you, you have to take it or else. And so, they were, unceremoniously booted out of the military because she refused, and and her husband couldn't. The doctor said, don't do this, it could harm you, like, seriously. And the doctor even, like, wrote waivers and everything, and they still said, nope, don't care, you're gonna take it. And so they both decided, you know what, no, this is not a country I want to serve anymore. And my wife, out of fear, God bless her, but I understand that she was afraid for our livelihood, because I wasn't working at the time, which that's a whole nother subject I'll talk about at some point. She was afraid that we would be basically booted out on the street and we wouldn't have anywhere to go, because, we were living in base housing. Everything was, covered by the military. Like, I was like, great, vote of confidence, wife, that you don't think I can get a job real quick. But it was scary times. It was COVID. It was hard. I understand where she was at. I'm not mad at her about that anymore. It was a big fight we had, and it was over. It happened. We had one of our children afterwards, so, hopefully there's no further complications down the road. But it does scare me when I think about it, because there were health side effects after she took that thing. And so, we dealt with that. But the left, they were like, they showed their true colors there. They were full on, goose stepping. They were arresting people who were alone on beaches. They were literally forcing people to take the vaccine. They were firing people from their jobs. They were doxing people who were anti, and so we saw openly how the left felt about us, the ones who were like, yo, that's not for us, we don't want to do it. They called us murderers and killers because, we would get someone sick because we were, we didn't have the pokey poke. And so, after that, we saw January 6th. We saw basically the entire left call all of us. And again, bless my wife. Praise y'all for my wife, because I wanted to go to that. I was like, hey, I haven't seen Trump speak, and we were close enough. We were like, DC was only a few hours away from where we were at. I was like, I'd like to see Trump speak at least one last time before his presidency is over, because we kind of had a feeling, that his attempts to basically, like, hey, let's do a recount or whatever weren't going to work. So I said, I want to see Trump speak at least one time. And my wife was like, well, who's going to watch the kids? And I was like, well, we can stay in the back of the crowd and we don't have to, be near the front. And she's like, it's just not safe. And she was right. She 100% praise Yah that she basically talked me out of going. Because who knows where that would have ended up. There were innocent people who their only crime was being there. And you all know this. Everyone knows this. I mean, that couple that was there after the fact, that was there like 3 hours after everything had simmered down and people had gone home and, there was no more barricades or anything, and they got thrown in prison. The old grandmas that were literally just walking and taking pictures, and let's not forget the video of the people dressed in all black who were suddenly throwing on MAGA gear in the park nearby, and then not long later, those same looking people wearing masks and, all covered up were the ones being violent at the front of the line. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Makes you wonder. And so we saw the left is willing to not only be draconian, they're not only willing to be violent, outside of the mainstream political party, but they're also willing to be violent with their mainstream political party. Like, they wanted all of us to go to prison. They wanted to send us to re-education camps. Like, you're like, oh, that's hyperbolic. No, it's not. They literally had prominent politicians saying that MAGA Republicans should go to re-education, and learn how not to be MAGA Republicans anymore. I'm not fancy. I'm not like Tim Pool, or I can't throw these screens up. It's just me in the truck. I'm just a truck driver. But we all saw that, right? We were all there for that. We saw that. And so now, after J6 and after, Trump's re-election and just the rhetoric on the constant rhetoric on the left, they call us Nazis, they call us fascists, they call us evil. And they have slogans like, by any means necessary. Well, if you walk that out in its logical conclusion, any means is any means, which means they're gonna go as far as it takes to stop us on the conservative side, because they want to do their thing, right? They want to have their supposed rights to murder babies in the womb and give children procedures. And so this today, just kind of thinking about like what I wanted to say on this subject. What do we do? Like I said, if you had asked me like a few days ago, I would have said, all of them. All of them. Just line them up. Like that sounds really totalitarian, but the thought in my head was, well, what did Yah say to the Israelites? What did he say to the the children of Israel when they were to enter the promised land, right? He said, hey, those people, the Hittites, the Amorites, kill them, all of them, don't leave a single one of them. And a lot of I talk about this sometimes. I remember talking to a lady about it in church, and she's like, "Oh, I don't like the Old Testament because that God in the Old Testament was just so, Jesus is better God." I'm just like, wait a minute, whoa, hold up. What do you mean that God? What do you mean Jesus is like the better God? Like, and honestly, there are some Christians who honestly believe that the Old Testament and the New Testament are just completely different things. Like, don't worry about the Old Testament, it doesn't matter. Like, we'll take the 10 Commandments and maybe a few stories here and there, but we'll throw the rest out. And I'm just like, yo, God said he never changes. He's the same today, tomorrow, forever. So what do you mean that God? And there's a reason, a big reason was Bedortov, the DNA. Those people had fallen angel DNA in them, which that's why there were giants. There's a really good study on that. Like, I don't pretend to be the guy who's gonna go through all that in great detail. There are other people who do a really good job, like Bear from Bear Independent. Yeah, go check out his Bible series. Amazing work. He's actually one of the main reasons that I'm doing this is because he inspired me to kind of talk and be out there in this realm and to read the scriptures. Pastor Joe Fox from Shofar Mountain, also, he's got some really good word on the scriptures. But anyways, so God, there are times when God says kill them all, and that's kind of where I was at a few days ago. I was like, F them, kill them all. Like, what do we do? And so now that I've had a few days to kind of stew on it and to think and to process and to let the rage out, which is something I had to do because it's really easy for me to be wrathful. I know that about myself. I have to be careful. And my wife, she's very quick to point that out. She's like, you have this wrath that it's in a good place, but it's not helpful. And I think today's proverb was actually very, very, very useful for explaining that. Basically it says nothing good comes from a wrathful mouth. Anything spoken in wrath is not good. And so what do? We have people like Destiny on the left. This is something that just came out recently. He was on Piers Morgan's show, and he openly said it. He said, basically his line was, if Christian conservatives aren't going to stop electing or advocating for their policies, then they deserve to die. Like, he basically said, sit down, shut up, and stop voting. Stop pushing for your candidates. Don't vote Trump in. Don't support people like Charlie Kirk. Don't support people on the right. And he said, if they do, then they should fear being killed. So here's a prominent leftist who is a nutbag, in my opinion. I don't listen to anything he has to say, and honestly, I think he's crazy. But out here basically advocating on national television like, hey, conservatives should be afraid. They should be afraid of dying because of their views. And we saw it with Charlie Kirk. They murdered one of the most moderate among us. A guy who just wanted to spread the word of God and to have conversations. And when you look at it, that's me. That's hundreds of other Christians. That might be you, who just wants to, share their ideas and values, and they will kill you for it. And the left has been saying this for a long time. They've basically turned off the, we're going to talk about it, and they've gone completely violent. And we saw that in the people that were speaking and cheering and, man, I just, there's demons in those people. There's demons in those people. You can see it. One of the things that I was talking about with my wife recently was the fact that we've been noticing a demonic presence in the world. Like, it's been much more clear to us. Like, we see it more readily, you know. And I think the more spiritual we get, the more sensitive we get to that stuff. Because, you know, before it was like, oh, well, they just have their opinion or whatnot. But these people who are like literally cheering and celebrating and laughing and, you know, just doing all this stuff that you know, a normal person would be like, that's not okay, you know. Like, you may dislike someone, but that's not okay to actively, you know, turn my light on, to actively, you know, celebrate someone's death. And these people, they don't care. They're literally, not only are they celebrating it, they're calling for more. They actively want their, you know, there's Tim Pool talked about it. There's literally lists of conservatives being shared around on, you know, Discord and Reddit pages, you know, and even people like Tim Pool, who are not, I would not consider Tim Pool a right-leaning figure. You know, he's almost as moderate as it comes, and he's actually kind of left-leaning when it comes to some of his views on, you know, like abortion and stuff like that. But they want him dead because he's willing to have the conversation and he's willing to push back a little bit. So if they want a left-leaning person who, you know, still has the desire to have conversation, if they want that person dead, then what does that mean for you and me? And so the crux of, you know, where I'm going with this is, you know, what do we do as Christians? And this is just my opinion as a truck driver in the United States. We have to be ready. We have to, you know, as PJ says, come out of her, my people. You know, we should not be living in cities anymore. Like, I'm sorry, like, I know, convenient, right? Like, it's nice to be able to go to Walmart real quick, drive down 5 minutes down the street, like, there you go. Like, it's nice to be able to go watch a movie, you know, and do those things. It's nice to, like, I hope maybe someday I can still play D&D. Like, I enjoy it. I'm a nerd. You know, like, I like sitting around a table and telling stories. You know, I ran a game and it was great, and we had really good friends, and I miss it. And you know, like, it was cool, but those days are pretty much over if you care about, you know, staying out of this. And that's the thing, is we have to separate. You know, and like, oh, what about unity? Well, JD Vance said it pretty good today. There is no unity with someone who's going to scream at children for their parents' political beliefs. There is no unity for people who are going to mock and laugh and celebrate the murder of someone because of their political beliefs. There's no unity. You don't come together. There's no talking. There's no convincing about that. So as Christians, we have to remember that we are told that we're going to be separate. We're going to be kadosh. It's kind of why it's the name of this channel, you know, living kadosh, living holy and separate. You know, we should seek to find like-minded people, you know, like-minded community, and build out our own communities. Now, eventually, that is going to lead to violence, because, you know, if we gain communities and we build up strong communities, the left is going to feel threatened by that. They're going to feel threatened. You know, they're going to say, oh, look at those Christian radicals out there in the woods. You know, we gotta end them. We gotta stop them, or else, you know, they might gain power or something. And so, what's the next thing? Well, we gotta be good. We gotta be good at using our tools. You know, we have to be fit, which is something that I'm working on. You know, I go to the gym with my wife when we can, and you know, I try to stay active, even though I drive a truck, which is extremely difficult to stay very active, because, like today I basically, you know, covered half of the Midwest, and, you know, in a day, and it's, you know, it's tiring. Like, honestly, when I'm done with this video, I'm gonna, you know, eat my meager dinner and, you know, rack out for the night. And so we have to have the skills and proficiencies to defend ourselves, you know? And we have to realize, and this is kind of the thought that I've been going along with, is yes, Yah calls us to be warriors in his name. He calls us to be strong, authoritative, but like I said this morning in my Proverbs video, you know, he also sometimes calls us to sacrifice. And that means to sacrifice ourselves. And what do I mean by like not like, oh, bonsai, you know, like, no, like sometimes there's just nothing you can do. Like, you will be in the fire. You know, you will be in a situation that, you know, maybe when all the fight is done and you've got nothing left, maybe the enemy will be stronger. And that's the thing, is we can't, there's a lot of, there's a lot of people on the right and in our, you know, preparedness circles and what, they're like, oh, those leftists, they can't fight. They don't know how to fight. You know, they're skinny soy boys, yada yada yada. And it's just like, don't underestimate your enemy ever. Yes, are a lot of them soy boys? Mm-hmm. But are some of them training and getting good with their weapons? Yeah. I have a friend, you know, and he goes to the range often where he lives. And unfortunately, when he goes to this range, it's a public range. Anyone can go. There's no memberships. It's conservation land, you know. He sees a lot of pink and purple and, you know, nose-pierced people at those public ranges with very good setups, you know, running those setups properly with decent tools. They're not just slamming together, you know, cheap stuff. They've got the money for the gear and they're actually doing it right. And so what does that mean? What does that mean? If they've got the money for the gear and they're training, what are you doing? What am I doing? I'm going to openly admit something right now. I have a rifle. That I bought pre-COVID when my wife went on deployment for her first deployment, and I had some money that was burning a hole in my pocket. And I bought a rifle from PSA, you know, just a standard AR. And since the moment I bought it, it hasn't had a round go through it. It's been sitting in the safe. It's been sitting, you know, basically idle. It's not being used. It's a tool that I have that, you know, I slapped some gear on it, you know, it's got a scope, you know, basic stuff, a decent, you know, mid-range scope, and I've had the intention of using it, of practicing with it, of, you know, training with it, like use your tools, and I haven't, because for one reason or another, you know, I drive a truck, no time to go to the range, I'm only home so many hours a week. Like, I get home for 2 days. I have 2 days at home that I spend, and one of those days is Shabbat. And I don't do things on Shabbat. Like, we don't go to the range on Shabbat. Like, you know, I try to just chill at home with my family and just enjoy that day to spend with my family. And I get some people have different opinions on what you can and can't do on Shabbat. I'm not a legalist. I just, you know, I don't want to go spend money. I don't want to go and cause other people to work. And unfortunately, in my area, a lot of the ranges, people are working. So, you know, and is that an excuse? Yeah, I probably could go on the other day. And the other day, we're usually running around, you know, getting groceries and getting, you know, stuff for the week. And that's the day that I get to do all the honeydew things that my wife wants me to do, if she's got anything for me to do. You know, luckily I don't have a big honeydew list because we live in a camper. There's not really much to do, you know, right now as we save money for land. But as it sits, I don't use my tools as much as I'd like to. And so I need to change. That was kind of one of the realizations that I came to today is like, do I have the gear? Yeah, I have some of the gear. I don't have as much gear as I'd like. Do I have the training? Not really. I'm a decent shot. I've been a decent shot my whole life. I used to shoot when I was younger, and I'm pretty okay. Like, I can hit the broadside of a barn, but can I ping targets at 300 yards consistently? I don't know. It's been a while. So like we all have things that we can work on. We all have things we can do. We're way behind on our food prep and storage just because of our situation. We're living in a camper and we don't have a lot of places to put stuff. And so, we're all in this situation. But as a truck driver, I understand that if we start seeing real violence, like real violence, that's both sides, not just, one side, the Civil War stuff. It's gonna shut the country down pretty fast. And yeah. You ever play the thought experiment of what happens when the trucks stop running and the food starts not showing up, and most people have less than a week's worth of food in their home? Yeah, that's not gonna be great. It's not gonna be amazing at all. And if you're in the preparedness circles, you know this, so I'm just kind of preaching to the choir at that point. But so anyways, I'm going to wrap this up. My question on what do we do is, well, what I would do and what I'm trying to do is I'd find a piece of land that's, at least 30 minutes to an hour away from the big city. I'd make sure that land is defensible. Like, it's not like right next to the highway or something. It's out of the way, not easily spotted, not easily gotten to. And I would start raising an F ton of animals and garden and, just stocking food. And, what does it say? In the house of the wise, or no. Yeah, in the house of the wise are choice food and oil, or in the storehouses. In the storehouses of the wise are choice food and oil. There are people that I look up to that are way more prepared than I am, and way better shape when it comes to community. And I'm striving to get there. Like, that's the beeline I'm making right now. Like, we are literally shoving every last single penny that we can get our hands on, we paid off our debt. We're working on, we've zeroed in on a piece of land that looks very promising, which, Yah willing, we'll be able to pick up. And, within a year, we should have everything we need to kind of get out there on that land after, it's raw. There's nothing on it. like, we're going to have to do our own power, our own water, like everything. There's no utilities, but that's kind of the beauty of it, right? If you do all your own stuff, you don't have to worry about stuff when things start to fail. And so, my opinion, what do? We get right with Yah. We get in our word. We separate. We go kadosh. We live kadosh. We separate from the world. We don't have to become hermits, but we basically, we keep a low profile, but we keep a thumb on the pulse of the community, right? We understand what's going on in the world around us, but we don't make ourselves targets, because right now the left is walking around angry, looking for people. They're looking for targets. They're looking for reasons. And honestly, in my opinion, right now, I don't think our country is going to turn around. There's a part of me that wonders what's going to happen when Trump's done being president. Because if we get another Democrat, it's going to be, COVID 2.0. And they are going to take our rights away. They are going to try to do all the things that they were trying to do the first go around with Biden, when they decided that, they're no longer going to play the game. They just basically are going to go full on authoritarian, which is, it's hilarious when the left accuses us of being authoritarian, accuses Trump of being authoritarian of all people. I'm just saying, if somebody that was my friend that basically helped me get into the White House through his advocacy program was murdered in the way he was, there would not be a left in our country right now if it was me. But good thing it's not me, right? Good thing I'm not in charge of that. So, anyways, that's my take. I don't know. I probably got more I could say, but it's already been like 40 minutes, so I'm gonna go to bed. I'm gonna call my wife and get ready for bed and drive tomorrow. God, I love trucking. All right, y'all. Till next time. Shalom.